Right, so next is Dr. Duygu Camurcuoglu, who is at the moment in Istanbul. She's a senior inorganic object conservator at the British Museum and the lead conservator for the Beirut Glass Project. Duygu studied conservation at UCL, followed by a material science PhD. Her main interest areas are conservation research, teaching conservation, outreach, and project management leadership in conservation. And alongside her is Claire Cuyaubere, sorry, who's actually Claire's in Portugal, Duygu's in Istanbul at the moment. Claire studied in Paris at the INP. She's one of the project conservators for the Beirut project and a freelance conservator specializing mainly in glass, ceramic, and enamel. So over to Claire and Duygu. Okay.
Thank you very much, Helen, and also thank you to the Icons Archaeology group for contacting us, and asking us to give this talk about the Beirut Glass Project. The project itself has lots of different aspects, and it's a collaborative project, so lots of different parties are involved. But today, in the next 15 minutes, we will be giving you an overall, talking about the overall kind of information on the project, and also updating you at its current stage. So Claire, could you please show the first slide? Great, thank you. And this presentation, me and Claire will actually give it together. So we shared some slides. So you'll hear some information from me and some information from Claire. You may remember the 4th of August 2020 explosion in the port of Beirut city in Lebanon. And I'm not going to go into the details of this explosion, but it's everywhere, basically. Also on the internet, you can read the details of the explosion. But during the explosion, the American University of Beirut Archaeological Museum, which is still located in the 3.2 kilometers, like 2 miles from the blast. You can see, I don't know if you can see my hand, but you can see on the left this yellow arrow. So the AUB, as I will call AUB Archaeological Museum, was in that direction. Thanks, Claire. And so you can see it's not actually too far from the explosion. The area, the main area you see in the first slide, it's basically where the port is. Following the explosion, the image on the top left side, it's the damage happened to the buildings around the port. We can go to the next. Yes, thank you. And the image you see right below, it's basically the building of the American University of Beirut Museum, Archaeological Museum. And the other 3 images are the images showing damaged areas, several areas in the building, in the museum building. The office areas got damaged. Luckily, the staff was not in. It was during the pandemic, so they were all working from home. So luckily, no one working in the museum got injured. But you can see some damage occurred. The main entrance door, the glass, you can see on the right top image, the glass door to the museum shop, and some of the office areas got damaged. We can move on to the next slide, Claire. The next one, thank you. And you can see the main, basically the core of the Beirut Glass Project. It's this display case in the museum with 74 glass objects in total, mainly Roman glass, but there are also a few Islamic and Byzantine glass too. And due to the kind of vibration and the power of the explosion, this display case literally collapsed, fell down, and together with the glass from the display case, 72 archaeological glass vessels got severely damaged, and 2 of them survived, amazingly. And you can see the image on the bottom right, the display case collapsing. Of course, this was the beginning of how the Beirut Glass project started taking shape. Until the first 8 teams arrived to the museum, this case just was left in the place that, where it fell down. And then from the next slide onwards, we can move on, Claire. The next slide, please. And you can see the damage. And this is one of the close-ups of the initial damage. Once the display case was lifted, you can see the shattered glass and the display glass together, and you can see this devastating view and the feeling. Next slide, please. Okay, so from the project phases 1, 2, and 3, Claire actually got involved in the AUB Museum in Beirut. And I'll pass you on to Claire from this point onwards to talk to you about what happened once, right after the explosion, and how she kind of went to the museum and attended the first stage recovery of the glass vessels. Claire, over to you.
Thank you. So in Beirut, what happened right after the explosion is that INP, the French National Institute for Cultural Heritage, was in contact already with Dr. Nadine Panayot, who is the curator for the AUB Archaeological Museum, and immediately offered their help with the recovery. And so this is how I flew to Beirut a month after the explosion, due to several difficulties, but mostly COVID and lockdown. So a month exactly after the explosion, I was able to fly to Beirut with some conservation and rehousing supplies, which were not available in the country then. So for 4 days, I worked with the whole museum team, as well as several volunteers, archaeologists and archaeology students, to pick up the glass. And this was done in a methodical manner. We divided the floor into a grid, like an archaeological grid, to make sure that we would keep the information about where the fragments were located on the floor and how they connected to one another. And so over the course of 4 days, we were able to pick up every single fragments that we could find and separate it out from the modern glass from the display case and the shelves. Then we had a second phase almost a year later, and I was for this one helped by Cécile Rodier, who's an INP student and who interned with me there for 2 months. And there we had help from 4 archaeology students from AUB. And then that's when we started puzzle work, obviously, and then conservation, treatment, and reconstruction. And then a third short phase happened last January. There was a conference about glass and glass conservation at the AUB. And there I got help from Stephen Coop, which you all know, certainly, Chief Conservator Emeritus, who just retired from the Corning Museum of Glass in New York. And so then over the course of a few days, we were able to still reconstruct some more glass objects. And then during the second phase of the project, we also selected the 8 vessels that are now part of the Beirut Glass project, which we will present now. So this is what we did in Beirut. We set up a temporary lab in the main room in the library at the AUB Archaeological Museum. So the emergency was mostly stabilization. Most of the vessel showed some advanced signs of glass degradation. So a lot of surface consolidation as well as structural consolidations whenever there were cracks. A lot of time spent sorting shards and doing puzzle work, which was extremely time consuming and difficult. And for that, having archaeology students helping us was a lot of help. And it was also for them a training opportunity. And so during that time, we already started to reconstruct several vessels, and were able to reconstruct 12 of them. And given the time constraints and the fact that we didn't have all of a full lab, we only did reconstruction and no fills, no surface cleaning other than removing excess adhesive after reconstruction. So more basic treatments, but recovery really. And so over those 3 phases, out of the 74 vessels, as Duygu said, 2 did not break. 18 were reconstructed in Beirut. So during phases number 2 and 3. And then 8 are currently treated at the British Museum. So we'll talk about that more. And then there are still 46 of them that are in need of conservation treatment in Beirut. And I mean, several of them are already in good shape for reconstruction. We have found a lot of pieces, so I'm hopeful that we can do more, but obviously more puzzle work is necessary. Then on to you, Duygu.
Thanks, Claire. So, like following the phases 1, 2, and 3, the director of the British Museum, Hartwig Fischer, following the explosion in the Beirut city, immediately contacted the AUB Archaeological Museum and asked them how the British Museum can support them in every aspect, basically. Of course, we know that in Lebanon, there are now no object conservators. I know one, but of course, people, it's pandemic time, so people were not able to kind of just attain projects. So therefore, as you know, when there are difficult times, particularly in cultural heritage, museums, teams, they always require conservation support. So Dr. Nadine Panayot, the curator of the AUB Archaeological Museum, the head curator, she requested for conservation support. Together with Claire's assistance and with the help of the AUB team, they selected 8 objects, 8 glass vessels, to be able to kind of travel to London, and they were the ones that who Claire initially thought that they had most of the fragments there, so they are reconstructable. At that time, we were in furlough in the UK, and I was sent. Because this was an emergency situation, I was sent the images of these objects to have a look with Hartwig Fischer's request to see and to give some time estimates for the full conservation reconstruction of these vessels, because the team, including the curators from the Middle Eastern department at the British Museum and the Conservation Collection Care Department. They wanted to put a funding proposal together to support the Beirut Glass project. So my involvement, my first involvement and the kind of shaping and forming of the Beirut Glass project at the British Museum first started like this. And of course, I sent the time estimates and all the team, started working together online, and the funding proposal put together. And finally, the TFAF very, very, luckily, very kindly gave financial support to the project, and all the arrangements came into place. And with all the help from the Beirut team, the AUB team, Claire, all the packing, the 8 objects, the 8 vessels were packed to be shipped, transported to London to the British Museum. And in December 2021, I received the objects at the British Museum. I checked them, initially, and their condition assessments were done. And from then onwards, we basically decided to create the 3-month conservation contract, to employ a glass conservator, an experienced glass conservator, to complete the reconstruction and conservation of these 8 glass vessels in 3 months, to help with obviously the safekeeping and conservation of these objects, but at the same time supporting the exhibition project, which I will talk about in a bit. Claire, you can pick up again and talk about the conservation of the vessels, please.
Right. So what you're seeing now are the initial steps of the Beirut Glass project at the British Museum. So the unpacking of the fragments, making sure that we have all of them, a condition assessment, and checking it against the condition reports that we had written a year ago with Cécile Rodier in summer 2021. Some photo documentation, and then some further puzzle work was necessary. And then we decided to divide the objects into 3 tiers, tier 1 being the more simple, straightforward treatments, and then tier 3 being more complex objects with a high number of fragments, surface or structural instability, and then the need for some structural fills. Just to give you a sense of what we have, these are some of the objects, and it ranges from the object on the top right, being a tier 1 object with only 35 fragments and healthy surface, no lifting, no iridescence, or almost no iridescence, to the object on the plate that is on the top left, for which we found close to 200 fragments, some of which probably may not belong to actually, but it's a bigger object. The number of fragments is much higher. As you can see, there's a lot of iridescence and lifting happening here. So a more complex treatment that we were foreseeing. And then the last 4 objects, again, tier 1 on the top right, and then actually the object on the lower left is a tier 3 object because of the more complex form, more complex shape of the object, and the number of tiny fragments, and the need for structural fills. And this is the room that was assigned to the Beirut Glass project, and it's been really great to be able to spread all of the fragments at once on the tables. And you can see us here on the lower right is Aimé Bourrisque, who is an archaeologist working at the AUB Archaeological Museum, and who was sent to the BM for training, and who has been supporting the project. So what the protocol that we decided for the treatment of the object was to consolidate surface and cracks using 5 to 10% paralloid B72. And then the reconstruction, we've only been using Stephen Koob's recipe for B72, so preparing it with a bit of fumed silica and using it in small aluminum tubes, which come in really handy, and it works really nicely with the right texture and workability. I wasn't able to use magic tape on most of the objects due to the fragility of the surfaces. So usually sitting the fragments upright in containers with small glass beads has been really helpful. Just use them as a sandbox, but less aggressive for the glass surface. And then we only did structural fills, no aesthetic fills, and so only fills needed for structural support to support the weights of other fragments, or to protect adjacent fragments, maybe with small connection or jagged edges, anything that could be snagged on during handling, but no aesthetic fills. And we decided to use B72 sheets and cut them into the shape of the losses as necessary, and just train paint them. Then here we have a time lapse that was made of the reconstruction of one of the tier 1 vessels, the little bowl that you saw earlier. So that the audio-visual team at the British Museum has been doing a lot of filming, also that will be used also for outreach and the exhibition. And that's the object that has 35 fragments, and it did not required any fill. So after this reconstruction, the treatment was complete. And then when this is over, I will pass it on to Duygu. So you can see in the front the little glass beads that I was mentioning earlier that I have been using as a sandbox.
Normally this time lapse is much more quicker, but I think because of the internet connection, it's yeah, it was a bit longer here. So of course, the conservation part of the project is the kind of main, the core of the project. But at the same time, to be able to understand more, receive more information and understand the objects in detail, we also collaborated with the scientists from the British Museum, AUB Museum, and also from the UCL Institute of Archaeology. At the British Museum, our scientists used surface micro XRF X-ray fluorescence and the variable pressure scanning electron microscope to do compositional data analysis on the body of the fragments. And obviously, they're both non-destructive. We also used Raman and Raman spectrometry and RTI, reflectance transformation imaging, to kind of observe and understand some of the surface decoration and also the surface deposits, both inside and outside the vessels. With UCL also, so can we actually change the slide, Claire? With UCL, we got help from the professor in Freestone by using LAICP-MS, laser ablation inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry. And this is basically this technique you may already know, but it's taking microscopic sample of the glass fragments using a laser, and then it does a compositional analysis of the sample down to the trace elements. The sample is tiny, really tiny, and it's not visible to the naked eye. So both all the techniques used both at the British Museum and at UCL, they did not make any impact on the conservation of the objects, on the glass fragments. But of course, there were other kind of issues, like trying to kind of manage the time schedule for the analysis, because obviously sometimes the fragments actually had to go for the scientific analysis, and then, you know, myself and Claire kind of had to discuss and try to manage, you know, the conservation work schedule. But apart from these kind of challenges, we got quite an interesting, kind of discoveries following the analysis. At the moment, the report is being written. So hopefully we'll start giving everyone more information, scientific information on these glass vessels. Claire, you want to talk about very briefly on one of these beakers, because I think everybody might get very interested in this particular object scientifically.
Right. So I'm just going to go over it quickly because I think we're running late. But this this bottle was actually initially misattributed in the AUB Archaeological Museum database. It was attributed to the Roman period, but actually from the shape and the style, it was suspected that it was more from the Islamic era. And actually, composition analysis have shown that this is actually more of a plant ash composition, and that's more typical of the Islamic world. And more specifically, it confirmed that it most likely was produced in Syria and probably in Raqqa. So that was an interesting discovery. And then we also had questions for the scientific research department about the deposits that were both on the interior and the exterior of this object. So on the exterior, this black, very fine and dense deposit that you see on the right of the screen turned out to be some amorphous carbon, which is soot. So we're still trying to figure out what exactly, where it came from and how it got on the object, and debating whether to clean it off or keeping it. And then what's on the interior is more of a sandy, bluish, whitish deposit, and it appears to be crushed up pieces of glass, of different glasses, but the composition of it with lead and probably arsenic as an opacifier make it unlikely that it's contemporary to the bottle, but it probably 19th century or later. So we're still not quite sure what it was used for, but because of that, we're able to decide that it will be preserved inside the bottle and not cleaned off. Here,
Yes,
and here are the last step of the project. Go ahead.
Yes. So basically, all these beautiful objects being conserved by Claire, our team at the British Museum, myself, Claire, we had Emma Burisk, who was our project intern, and of course, Loretta Hogan. We all have been trying to support Claire in every way for her to finish all these beautiful objects in 3 months. So the project is going to end 8th of July. And then sadly, Claire will leave us, but of course our collaboration will continue. And after that, myself and the team will be preparing these objects for a 2.5 months of display, 25th of August till the end of October at the British Museum in room 3. The room, when you come into the British Museum, if you turn right straight away, in that room, the room 3, there will be an exhibition displaying these beautiful 8 objects before they can actually can send back to the AUB Museum to Beirut, to Lebanon. The project also covered, so Claire did not only sit down and conserve these objects, but at the same time, we kind of accepted a lot of visits to the project. We did lots of filming, so you will be able to see very soon filming explaining the whole project in detail on social media, interviews including BBC World Service, and also, of course, the exhibition, the final exhibition. So this project, we are very happy to involve in it, and all emotional that is going to end soon. But we also would like to thank you all for inviting us again to this archaeology group meeting. I'm sure you'll hear more information about the project and the objects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was brilliant. I found amazing, just amazing, and I have lots of questions. Would everybody be okay to stay till say 5:45? It seems a shame not to
Sorry, we have been a bit, we kind of
no, that's okay. We probably should have allowed a half an hour for you with two speakers as well. I'm proposing that we stay till 5:45 so we can have enough time for a few questions right now, and then enough time for both the last two speakers. So some quick questions at the moment, and then at the end perhaps too. Anything anybody wants to ask right now quickly? Yeah, it is amazing work. And
yeah, can I just jump in there? Yeah, absolutely brilliant and fascinating. Thank you to the two speakers for letting us get an insight into what that is all about. I was just wondering, would the team or the archaeology group be happy to announce to the membership once the publication is out? Because that sounds really interesting. Is that because sometimes they sort of disappear in very specialist journals and we never hear anything about it again. So if the membership in an Iconect or something could maybe be made aware of it, that would be fantastic.
Yes, sure. As soon as we put something together, some information start coming out, of course, we will circulate it around the field and the colleagues. Yes, of course.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Quick question. Were there some that you just cannot work on? Is some just beyond retrieving?
I mean, I think when I first saw the images, I was very upset and emotional, but at the same time, after meeting Claire and after knowing that she actually went there immediately and saw that scene in front of her, it just I just don't know what to think, to be honest with you. So So Claire, really, I mean,
I think there's more that can be done. Probably not all 46 remaining objects can be salvaged. Some of it has been pretty much crushed into powder. Mm-hmm. But the more we make progress, the more we find new shards, new connections. So I'm actually relatively optimistic that we can do a lot more. So it's a matter of finding funding, really.
Yeah. And there's a question from Julia. Would be interested to know how you pack the glass. What was the white material hugging the edges of the fragments?
Right. So for packing the objects, we decided to make individually pack each of the bigger or more curvy or more fragile fragments. The smaller and flatter ones were individually wrapped in jiffy foam and individually bagged, but all of the bigger ones, the ones that would not withstand being once against another, I just made like custom made like cutouts in ether foam and covered it with Tyvek.
Yeah, I see. Okay, good. Let's go on to the next one. And then at the end, some more questions for you, if that's okay. Okay, so Saray, and I'm sorry your name was misspelled on the program. It's Saray.
Yeah.
Naidorf is an inorganic objects conservator at the BM. She studied at UCL, lead conservator for the Chettle Park Hoard. Main interest areas at this stage of her career are conservation of archaeological material, jewelry, Greek and Egyptian metalwork, and now the use of lasers on metal objects. Okay, Saray.
Thank you. Just 1 second. Sorry, 1 second. I'll share my screen. Okay. Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Helen, for the introduction. So I'm going to talk to you about a beautiful blue Roman glass jar from the Chettle Park Hoard. The hoard was discovered by a local metal detectorist in 2003 in the Chettle Park estate, Dorset, and it was excavated by archaeologists from Wessex Archaeology. The assemblage is from the Roman conquest period, and it comprises 8 objects. So 6 objects are of Roman origin, including the small blue glass jar here, a large glass cinerary urn, a copper alloy ewer, a patera, and 2 bowls. There was also a late Iron Age copper alloy mirror and a strainer bowl, which date from 800 BC to 43 AD. So the strong blue color of the glass jar probably comes from cobalt oxide, though it is difficult to tell the source of cobalt of this time. It is known that cobalt from earlier glass, late Bronze Age, was coming from cobalt alums from the western oasis of Egypt. So some of the blue glass cobalt could have been recycled during Roman times, melted and reused. The jar was most likely glass blown, and the ribs that you can see here pinched. This is also a thought, as the ribs are not symmetrical and the glass surface is very smooth and clear. In contrast, glass that has been molded might have more texture on its surface. Most of the objects of the hoard were extensively restored before they were acquired by the British Museum in 2009. This includes the blue glass, which was excavated in a fragmentary state. So it was decided in preparation for the display of the hoard that the glass had to be dismantled and reconstructed again, as it presented many unstable and fragile areas. This included big gaps in joints, like the ones that you can see here. Some fragments were not aligned properly, like in here, for example. And at least one fragment was not in the correct place. In this area, the fragments were not in the right place. The fields were not very aesthetic and didn't provide proper stability to the object when standing on its base. So here you can see the field, and this section here was really it wasn't allowing the object to stand properly. Also, there were many fragments left out the reconstruction. So the adhesive used previously was tested to be epoxy. So the glass was placed in a dichloromethane atmosphere for the epoxy to soften. Many photos were taken to record the location of the fragments beforehand. Once the object was in the chamber, it took a couple of days for the epoxy to start softening. Then the fragments and fields started to come apart. A lot of mechanical cleaning happened afterwards to completely remove the epoxy. I cleaned over 60 fragments under magnification with a scalpel and solvents. Once the fragments were cleaned, I started the puzzle work and temporary reconstruction, finding the joints and figuring out the order in which fragments should be put together to avoid any locking out. The condition of the surface of the glass is good, which was very helpful, as I could use the small strips of magic tape to hold the fragments together. I found out that reconstructing the object in 3 separate sections would work well. So I put all these small fragments together to form each big section, and then the 3 completed sections were joined. Having the object temporarily reconstructed facilitated me to find the location for most of the fragments, including the ones that were left out in the previous restoration. And this also helped me to familiarize with the joints and in which order should they be reconstructed. I removed the tapes systematically, recording every single fragment to make the final reconstruction easier. I find with glass that once you start putting the pieces together, it's better to do it quickly before the glue sets completely to allow all the pieces to fit well. So I decided the use of epoxy was not necessary to reconstruct the jar, given that it's an archaeological object and the walls were thick enough to use paralloid. So I made paralloid B72 the way Coops recommends. Place 25 grams of paralloid in a gauze, what you see here, and suspended it in a jar with 40.5 grams of acetone mixed with half teaspoon of fumed silica. The acetone was only touching a small part of the paralloid, which makes the paralloid beads dissolve faster. Once the adhesive was ready, I started attaching the fragments using a brush to apply it. Glass can be very complicated at times, as it doesn't break only in one direction, but it can also laminate. So there were many sections where I had to reconstruct the laminated fragments. Once the object was reconstructed, I started working on the fills. Given the nature of the jar, I decided to make 2 types of fills. The first type was going to be made with cast fills. These were for the base, where the glass was thicker and more support was needed. The second type were fills made with epoxy sheets for the body of the jar. I decided to do epoxy sheets for this section, as the glass walls were thinner and the area to cover was large. This technique also allowed me to give backing support to some of the fragments that were in a more vulnerable position, or fragments that had a very small area of attachment. So here I'm showing you the process of the 2-part mold. I started by making 3 fills with modeling wax, which is malleable when warm. This one here. I manipulated it to achieve these complex shapes that varied in thickness and curvature. However, the process was longer than I anticipated, as I could not work the surface of the wax to have the smooth finish I wanted, given that the heat of my hands would have softened the wax and changed its shape. So I decided to make a silicone rubber mold of the wax and cast it in plaster. So here is, I'm showing you here how these are the shapes, the 3 shapes that I made with the wax. And then once I cast them in plaster, and after I smoothed the plaster, I then made another mold for the plaster. But here I wanted to show you as well, I'm sure most of you know this, but is the different types that to make the molds. So sometimes we either use plasticine, or we can use the Lego to make walls. Here I was showing you is the ways we can make keys for the mold. So here I use the back of my brush, or we can use metal rods. So when I decided to make a silicone rubber mold for the wax and cast it in plaster. So once I had the plaster fills, I smoothed them to get the right surface. So here, once the plaster fills were made, I made the silicone rubber molds once more and cast them in 2020 Archaeological epoxy. So at the end, I ended up making 3 different molds, which was a lot. Here you can see when I'm making the just the plaster mold. And then at the bottom, you can see the epoxy fuse. Then I started the process. Once that was done, I started the process with epoxy sheet fills, also using Araldite 2020. I taped a sheet of Melinex on a tile to have a flat surface, poured a thin layer of epoxy on the Melinex. 15 hours later, before the epoxy was completely set, I would take this sheet of epoxy, it's still attached to the Melinex, draw the shape I needed for the fill, cut it, and temporarily attach it to the glass with tape for the epoxy to get the shape of the jar. Once the epoxy was set, I would remove it from the glass and peel the Melinex off. I spent many hours working on this and made many modifications using heat to achieve a better shape for the support fills. The shape of the jar is complex and curves in many directions, making it difficult and time-consuming to achieve the correct shapes for the fills. So for example, in one of the large gaps in the glass, I decided to put a partial fill in the most fragile section, as it was impossible to get a very large epoxy sheet to bend in different ways, support the area properly, and look aesthetically good. So here I'm showing just the other ways of making sheets with a silicone mold, or also thicker sheets can be done if necessary, or it can also, as we heard before, with the paraloid, but probably with paraloid would be for a smaller scale fills. And here are some of the fills that I use for the objects, actually. For 1 second, yeah. I only colored the thick fills of the base and left the epoxy sheets clear. I made different experiments to achieve the right color, but at the end, the best results was by using golden airbrush colors applied with a soft brush and a layer of golden porcelain restoration glaze applied on top. The fills here look quite white, which I think is probably a reaction of the epoxy with the silicone rubber. However, once they were painted, they became translucent. The epoxy could also be mixed with pigments or dyes before casting it to achieve the right tones. These are just samples that are made that were not very successful, and the ones that I actually used were these ones here. On this slide, you can see both types of fills in place. They were attached to the glass with paraloid B72. I attached the sheets first, then the fills of the base, and last I placed the glass fragments that needed more backing support. So I placed, for example, like this one, needed some backing support, and this one as well, and there are others on the other side that also had to be supported. And here is the complete object, after many hours of work and finding the right solution for the many challenges along the way. So in hindsight, even though I learned a lot during the treatment of this object, I would change the model in wax for another material that is also malleable, but can be worked to achieve a smooth surface, to avoid the extra step of the molds. And another problem that I found is that the plaster slightly shrank, which wasn't very helpful. So, yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm hoping that as well, I'm hoping that we'll be able to do some material analysis in the future with the smaller few fragments that where I could not find the joints. And misaligned and incorrectly placed fragments have been relocated to the original position, allowing the object to be stable and to be displayed in a way that allows the public to appreciate it in a coherent as a coherent artifact. Most of the Chettle Park hoard objects will be on permanent display in the Britain and Europe Gallery at the British Museum from July. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's lovely. That's a beautiful vessel. We'll take one question right now, and then I'll suggest we go to Dana's, and then do questions for all three speakers. So anybody who has to leave by 5:30 will hear most of Dana's. Okay, so Hazel asked, did you find the adhesive method suggested by Koob easier to work with in a straightforward paraloid and solvent mix? That's including fumed silica with paraloid B72.
Yes, I think I like the consistency of it better, and I found that it probably had less bubbles as well. So yeah, definitely. I know he says that it's good to apply it with a tube, but I used a brush, and it worked really well. So,
great, it looks fabulous.
So, yeah, and a little bit less stringy as well, I found it. So,
less stringy, did you say?
Less stringy.
Okay, right, good. Okay, let's move on, and then we will come back to all three with questions. So we'll go on to Dana. Thank you very much, Saray. That was really, and it's such a beautiful vessel. Okay, Dana also studied UCL and then the Bartlett School of Sustainable Heritage for MSc. Dana has over 40 years experience working with museums and heritage organizations. She focuses on ancient technology research and increasingly involved in cultural education and community projects alongside developer-funded archaeological conservation work in the UK and abroad. Her project, CSI Sittingbourne, was co-winner of the 2012 ISE Keck Award for Public Engagement with Conservation, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. Dana's in California, so 8 hours behind, I think. Had to get up at 6:30 this morning. She recorded because Wi-Fi is unreliable, but will be here to answer questions. So over to Dana.
Hello, it's lovely to be here, part of today's celebration of glass. And I'm particularly focusing on some lovely glass I've recently been working on, excavated in Kent from high status Roman burials. Now, both of these sites were excavated by Swale and Thames Archaeological Survey Company, and so known as SWAT. And the one in this Aylsham in the picture here is hopefully destined to Dover Museum because the land was on Dover Council's property. But the other collection from Charing in Kent, most of the museums in Kent are full to the bursting and not receiving archaeological archives anymore. So we're not sure where that one is going. So it's a bit in limbo. And both of these were discovered ahead of housing developments. Now, just briefly, because I had, it's another lovely large storage stroke cremation vessel, I wanted to share this one. This was excavated several years ago, maybe 2 years prior, maybe 2017, and we worked on it in the CSI lab. And here's one of our CSI volunteers who's been there since about 2010, working alongside us, and he's a Roman reenactor. So it was great to have him helping along with deconstructing and getting the cremation from this one. And we found a lovely surprise. We found a tiny little bottle within this bottle. And here's a summer school replacement, school work placement student. Now, just briefly, the rest of the glass from that site, there's quite a lot of beautiful glass vessels, and they're all still awaiting funding. So them and the ceramics, some of them are on display in the CSI lab, and it's a new look. We're sharing the space now with the museum. We were a pop-up that opened in 2009, and we still have the space because it's a very quiet shopping mall. So we're trying a new model out, and the conservation labs at the back and the front of the unit will be the museum collections. So those of you who might be following the project or interested to see, I thought I'd throw that in. And but my main focus here is on how we got 2 large glass vessels out of the ground, and a little bit of the deconstruction process, and some of the reconstruction work as well. So here we are out on a small housing development, and there were, I think, 3 or 4 of these high status burials that had groups of vessels within them. So it was quite a nice summer, July 2019. We had intern Moppy, who's all at UCLA Getty PhD program right now, but had been doing an MA at the Courtauld at the time, and came along to CSI and interned with me for quite a while. Marie Lassault, long-standing conservation technician with the CSI project and my lab, but now working at the British Museum. And then we had 2 CSI volunteers, 1 work study placement, and 1 volunteer who was there as a stepping stone towards doing her forensic science CSI course. That was her. She's kind of obsessed with serial killers, which really, it was kind of interesting to hear her stories, but she found some of the techniques that we do quite interesting and helpful for her to get her entrance into university, and she's about to finish. Anyways, she was there for the day. Here we are block lifting a larger assemblage that we thought was metal assemblage. There were lots of studs and things to do with a box. So we thought, soon we had a box. We lifted it as a block, x-rayed it, and we find a lovely little glass vessel. So that's enough of the small glass vessels. Let's move on to the big ones. So this is a large rounded burial vessel, and I'm very fond of using clay these days for supporting block lifting, with no separating layer, and I use a red or buff or white clay, and then that can be easily washed away later. And I found it really great to feel more confident that my objects held together and not toxic as CDD, and although I do find that very useful sometimes too, CDD wax. But clay I'm using more and more, and that's one of the main reasons I wanted to come along and share this work today. And then we followed the clay with cling film and plaster bandages, because it was such a large object. We wanted to be sure we had extra support. And back in the lab, I also use a lot of on-site polyurethane foam, which I do feel guilty about because it's not a sustainable material, but it's I try to reuse it in insulation in areas and whatever. But anyways, it is good for using for large objects. And now here we are. So removing the clay. Here it is. Again, mostly. And another topic I wanted to talk about was share notes with people about how they relocate the pieces, because it wasn't certain at this time that we would get permission to put it back together again, and funding, and but we needed to get the cremation out so that that could be studied. So we put little numbers side by side and did drawings and tried to pack it up as we deconstructed it so it could come together again. Just a little post note that you could see the square where it was the glass was lifted, block lifted. Block lifting on site is always a compromise with and a lot of discussion and collaboration with the archaeologists about whether you can undercut what's there or not. So it was neatly cut out of the center, and then they continued excavating the burial. And what we found was it seemed to be timber lined, and then the sides of the timber collapsed down, and timber specialist, ancient woodworking specialist Damien Goodburn came along and advised on the worthiness of the survival of this wood in terms of whether we should block lift it or not. And the county archaeologist was very keen that we would, to just see if there was anything decoration or details underneath. So we used plaster directly on the surface so it would act as a mold and at least record the fragile surface. And then, but it was interesting, the sides, where the sides collapsed, we found more vessels and an actual pig's head there. So that was a nice a nice find. And here we are with Marie Lasso, and I each took one of these vessels and worked on it because some funding was found by SWAT in order to reconstruct these. Now, here we are again in the process, and at first I thought, of course, it might not even be able to be reconstructed because the heaviness of the handles, but then it did seem to go together quite well. But then I went away, working away for 6 weeks, left it packaged and supported, but this is the state it's in right now. So I was particularly keen to hear the talk on other gap filling techniques aside from epoxy. So this is the state it's in today. Now here's another one. This is an octagonal shaped urn. And here, the block lifted in a similar way. I think we did use the polyurethane on site. And here it was partially excavated. And this was a delightful find as we were cleaning the base of it, that it was nicely decorated. These are blown into molds. John Shepard is an expert on this type of glass vessel. I'm hoping to try to maybe do a publication with him about celebrating these groups of glass vessels that have been found recently, and he can explain a lot more of that there. Now, this was a delightful find, a little mystery splat. I'm thinking it's to do with something maybe from the blowing process, that a little bit of impurity or piece of metal that got caught up in the molds and was splatted across there. But it was a nice find, difficult to photograph though. And another joy of getting these odd angles as you're working on pieces at the conservation bench. And I liked seeing the technological residues of kind of the way the glass was put together and created. And here is the octagonal vessel as it stands today. I think it's being picked up actually by the archaeologists today. And so there I got through that quite quickly, and we have time for questions if anyone would like to ask some questions. I hope I covered it clearly enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Really interesting. Wow. I mean, use of clay. Just a quick question. Let's do some questions for Dana, and then for all the speakers actually, but mainly Saray and the afternoon speakers. Okay, there's some questions here. Hi, Dana. What did you use as an adhesive for reconstruction? Thanks for the amazing slideshow. Okay. What adhesive did you?
Hi, I used B72 as it comes in the tube, and the HMG paraloid version. A little humbled today, thinking, well, perhaps I should be making up Steve Coop's. I will try it and see how it compares, but I just used straightforward HMG out of the tube.
Yeah, I can understand that. Use of clay, is that something you've come up with, or has that been done before? That's really interesting.
Well, in my mind, I came up with it, but I may have heard it somewhere else. I first used it in lifting. I had a whole floor of medieval tiles that were all cracked and needed to work alongside the archaeologists and come up with a technique for lifting 500 tiles. And I came up with that idea of using it there and loved it. And so now I just started using it more and more in the field. Archaeologists, sometimes I've advised them when they haven't been able to get me out there, and unfortunately they use tissue in between, so it just put the clay directly on, otherwise you get moldy situation. So and it was a bit scary at first to put it directly on. It feels like, oh, you need a separating layer, but then I thought, well, it's just like soil essentially. So yeah, and I really love it now. So simple.
I can understand that. Where do you get the clay generally?
Oh, there's a clay supplier called a Clay Cellar in Kent, so that's where I get it. Yeah, and I prefer just straightforward clay, not the air drying clay, because if you never know how quickly things are going to get worked on. So yeah,
that would be important, wouldn't it? The air drying clay would cause problems, right?
Yeah, you wouldn't want it to set
No, no. Oh, any more questions for Dana, and then also for the other speakers?
I just want to make a comment, Helen, just so that Dana was talking about the difference between Stephen Coop's and HMG Paraloid B72. I actually tested both of them in my previous projects, and what I found easy is like something like what Dana worked on or has been working on. I found that like that heavy with thick fragments, thick edges. I found HMG Paraloid B72 way better, I must say. But if you are working on like Saray did, you know, thinner glass, smaller glass, I think Stephen's version then works for me. It worked much better, basically. I think it works with thinner glass much better than the HMG Paraloid B72. So
interesting.
I think it's like you know, strength plus you know, how quickly it sets, how quickly it starts supporting the object, or how easily you can dismantle the object later or during your reconstruction work. All these things need to be obviously considered, but yeah.
Okay.
Going on from Duygu, for Dana's super heavy guy that's already fallen apart, I might be tempted to use 48 B48N, which is much stronger. It's gloopier.
Yeah.
It's gloopier, and it's, you know, it's a bit harder to work because it can get quite stringy. But you know, you have a huge vessel there. You can get a bit sloppy. Or you know, you can just get it off. But the 48 will really hold on to those handles.
Thank you, Luisa. I'll try that.
That sounds good. Saray, when we were watching your rehearsal, we really liked your glass vessel that you use for deconstructing. It's, you know, something from the past, but you mentioned how well it worked. The glass vessel with the Vaseline. If you want to say something about that, better than Perspex, you know.
You mean, sorry, can you repeat, Helen?
The glass vessel that you used for deconstructing the object.
Yes, that's the chamber. Yes.
Yes, the chamber. Sorry, I should have said yeah.
Yeah, that chamber. Yeah, it's quite amazing. Yeah. I think at the BM we have those since, I don't know, forever, no, since the 60s maybe. Really, it's very heavy glass, and then you put Vaseline in between the lids to tight it, and it's really, you cannot lift it up. It's really difficult. You have to slide it out to open it. Yes, it really is very, it's a proper chamber.
Yeah.
But it only works, we only have that size, so
yes, of course.
It's something bigger that you have, like Duygu used when she dismantled this big bottle that is in the YouTube channel. We had to use a big box for it, right? Because you have to use a big box put it there, you know?
Yeah. We have a few more comments on.
Angela's lifted her hand.
Oh, okay. Okay, Angela, and then we'll go to some of the chat. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I have a question to all the speakers, or also anyone from the audience. With all the different techniques of gap filling we've heard about today, I was wondering if anyone has played around with actually 3D printing proper custom made infills for glass.
Well,
I haven't. I'm just curious.
This is something we're doing at the museum, a little bit starting, but it's not there yet. No? It's one of the main problems with the 3D printing is that well, it doesn't give you the exact size yet. Let's say if you want to make fields with it, it's still not so precise to make a proper fill. But at the same time, let's say, I think you'll have right now, if you want to make a fill outfit, you have to cast it and make it in a different material as well, because there is issues with translucency right now. Like they don't have the technology doesn't work yet to have fields to make it with translucent.
Do you think it'll happen in the future?
I don't know if, yes, I don't know if my connection, I think my connection, maybe it's not amazing actually. But I don't know if Loretta Hogan from the British Museum, if she's still here. She's working with a PhD student. It's been a few years, who's actually looking into ceramic gap fills with, you know, the 3D technology. So we are hoping that as we get more results from that, we can think about glass and we can focus on glass more.
And I think also to mention that we've already tested a few 3D printed things here and there. I think you have to be quite careful with what material you're choosing and stuff like that, because they tend to not pass ODI testing. And they tend to be actually stinky as hell, which is the first indication that something's not.
Yeah,
right.
exactly that, as well as accessibility costs and the environmental impact, I suppose. So all important things to consider.
Completely. We have another comment from Chris Collins. We tried 3D printing at the NHM and had shrinkage issues, and I had to adjust the 3D print size for infills, and nothing we used passed an ODI test. So that sounds like the same thing you're all saying. There were a few questions we missed before about adhesives. Claire saying B44 also is stronger than B72, and B48 has a higher glass temperature. B48 is preferable to use in high temperature climates due to the higher TG. I think that we're caught up. Dana says there's a wonderful series of reconstructing one of these large glass vessels at the BM online site by Duygu. Duygu, that's your like an Instagram site? Is it a BM Conservation in Focus? Is that what it's called? Do it.
Yes. So that's yes. So you can follow the Beirut Glass Project there, and also the conservation work we've been doing at the British Museum. You can follow different projects, different conservators, different objects on that Instagram page as well.
Yeah, that's been meaning to.
They were talking about the big blue glass object that you reconstructed a few years ago.
That is sorry, yes, that's on YouTube. That's on British Museum YouTube channel. Okay. 10 episodes explaining the whole conservation process of the cinerary urn. Yes, British Romano cinerary urn. Yes. Sorry, I think connection is not great here.
Yeah, you're a little bit bouncy. There's a question in the chat. I have a question for Liz, or anyone can help.
Yeah, I can answer that one.
Yeah, you can answer that one. Yeah.
Jody's asking what's the name of the epoxy paste. The epoxy paste is called Epopast 400 from Axon, and it's common in use by paleontologists and in the Natural History Museum to support dinosaurs that have been excavated. And we also use it as a supporting layers, backing layer for mosaics and the like, plaster things that need putting together. If once we have a separating layer between, because it's so can go really thin and it's really strong.
And that,
thank you very much.
Is it easily available?
Oh yeah.
Okay, good. And one thing about that vessel, when it was displayed, there was it was lit from underneath. So that it looked fabulous, and they did the technicians made a perspex mount for the display, so it was able to make it look translucent. Okay, I think, oh, there it is. Luisa's given the name, the Epopast 400 Axon. I'm sorry if everybody's okay, but a quick question for Duygu and Claire. Are there other conservation projects in Beirut for other materials? Metals, or I mean, I'm sure glass suffered the most, but are there other similar projects going on?
As far as I know, these glass vessels were the only vessels got damaged in the museum.
Oh,
inside the museum building, right, Claire?
So at the AUB, the only damaged to artifacts was that showcase of with the archaeological glass. I know there's a lot being done on buildings, historic buildings around Beirut and in the main city center. And then another museum was actually badly hit because it's really close to the location of the explosion, and it's the Sursock Palace and the Sursock Museum, but it's mostly on paintings and works on paper. And I know some work has been done and is probably still happening right now, I assume. But I think maybe not so much on objects. And then in the Sursock Palace,
that was lucky.
The stained glass windows had just been all redone, like restored just prior to the explosion. And they went to, like, they were shattered to pieces. So, but those are more like, they're not exactly like museum objects. They're more like decor. So I'm like, I don't know if they are being conserved or they are being redone. Basically.
Wow, that's lucky that other things weren't damaged as well as much. So, wow. Any more questions?
I mean, the collaboration hopefully will. Sorry, Helen. I just wanted to say that the collaboration with the AUB Museum will hopefully continue, and you know, hopefully for further support for archaeology and conservation. Hopefully.
Good. That's good. It's a fantastic project. I look forward to seeing the display. It's really a good idea to do that. Any other questions? It's 5:45. So if anybody would like to ask anything. Oh, somebody's asking how long is that display? That's a good question. The one that starts on the 20th of August. But do you know how long it is? Because they tend to be fairly short, I think.
It's 2 months.
It's on. Yeah, so it's until end of October, until the end of October.
Okay, great. And then the objects go back. So,
yes.
Yeah, good. Okay, we're getting thank yous for all the talks. It has been fantastic. 1 more minute, any more questions? No, well then I'll end with thanking all the speakers who are absolutely brilliant talks. Always so good to have little videos and attached as well. So really, thank you very much. And also thank you to Emma and Luisa who hosted the Zoom, and to Icon for allowing this platform. And thanks to all the committee who've been working over the year. And welcome to our new members, which is good. I think Riva is actually here. So you'll meet her another time. Right. That's it, I think, unless no burning last minute questions. Okay, great. Well, thank you all. It was really good, really interesting. And hopefully look out for our sessions in, so October. Hopefully we'll start again. Okay, thanks everybody. Goodbye. Thank you.